The wind didn't just blow, it hunted. It was a physical thing, a solid wall of ice and fury screaming across the Dakota plains, and Lara was caught right in its teeth, alone, betrayed. Her body was heavy with the child she was trying to save, and every ragged breath she took froze in the air before the gale ripped it away. Just hours ago, the flickering lights of a town called Redemption Creek had promised her safety. Instead, they'd offered her judgment. They'd looked at her, pregnant and desperate, and spat her out into the storm to die. Jedediah Stone, the man who put this child in her belly. Preacher Thorne, the man who called himself the town's righteous voice. They watched her agony and turned their backs. They condemned her. The cold was a predator, leeching the warmth from her bones, leeching the hope from her soul. She was supposed to die out here, swallowed by the drifts, a forgotten secret buried under a world of white. But they made one mistake. They didn't know who she really was. And they had no idea that through the blinding chaos of the blizzard, destiny was riding hard to find her. Not the death they'd wished upon her, but a salvation wearing the face of a Lakota chief. A man who would see past the hate that poisoned the land and claim this frozen, pregnant outcast as one of his own. This wasn't just a story about surviving the cold. It was a story about surviving cruelty. And it would end not with a quiet death, but with a firestorm of justice that would burn Redemption Creek to the ground. Redemption Creek. The name itself had been a promise. Whispered by a stagecoach driver weeks ago, it sounded like a place to disappear, a place to have her child in peace, far from the judging eyes of her past. She'd stepped onto its single muddy street clutching a small bag, and a hope so fragile it felt like spun glass. The town was a raw scar on the prairie, a saloon, a mercantile, and a stark white church whose spire stabbed at the sky like an accusation. Lara tried to be invisible. She kept her eyes down, her voice quiet. She just wanted to be left alone. But a woman alone on the frontier is never invisible, especially not when her belly begins to swell, the undeniable proof of her sin pushing against the worn fabric of her dress. The whispers started like a slow poison, glances from women outside the mercantile that cut sharper than knives, conversations that stopped the moment she walked by. Appraising looks from men on the boardwalk, some filled with a greasy kind of pity, others with something far worse. She felt their judgment like a physical weight, pressing down on her, trying to crush her. She found a room at the back of a boarding house, paying with the last of her money. She looked for work, mending, cleaning, anything. But every door was politely, firmly closed in her face. The heart of the town's poison pumped from the chest of Preacher Thorne. He was a tall, cold man with eyes that saw sin everywhere and forgave nothing. His sermons were thunderous things, filled with fire and damnation. He spoke of purity, of shielding the community from corruption, and his eyes always seemed to find Lara in the back pew, branding her a temptation, a disease. And Preacher Thorne had a powerful ally, Jedediah Stone, the man who owned the sprawling cattle ranch that was the town's lifeblood, the man accustomed to getting whatever he wanted, the man who had whispered promises to Lara under a summer moon, promises that now felt like a lifetime ago. He'd courted her, charmed her, and then, when her secret became visible, he'd cut her loose. His denial was cold, public, and absolute. He painted her as a liar, a desperate woman trying to trap a respectable man. And in Redemption Creek, Jedediah Stone's word was law. The pressure mounted. The widow who owned the boarding house regretfully told Lara she needed the room back. Suddenly, she wasn't just shunned, she was homeless. Winter was coming, breathing its first icy warnings across the plains. The net was tightening, woven from hypocrisy and fear. Her fragile hope for a quiet life was dead. There was only one place left to go. An abandoned prospector's lean-to on the far edge of Stone's property, barely more than 3 crumbling walls of sod and timber leaning against a rock outcropping. The fourth side was wide open to the wind. It wasn't a home, it was a ruin, but it was all she had. She worked tirelessly, her hands raw from the cold, patching the gaps with mud and branches. She was a survivor, and she would protect the life inside her, even if the whole world wanted them both erased. But Jedediah Stone didn't like loose ends, and Lara, living on the edge of his land, was a constant, living reminder of his lie. He decided it was time to handle the problem himself. He rode out on a windswept afternoon, flanked by two of his ranch hands. They found her near the pathetic lean-to, gathering brittle firewood. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't flinch. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear. It was contempt. "Lara," he said, his voice flat and dead, "this needs to end." She straightened up, clutching the bundle of sticks to her chest. "What needs to end, Jedediah? Your lie? Or just the inconvenience of my existence?" He had the decency to look away, out over the bleak, gray land. "Thorne agrees. The town agrees. You're a disruption." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch of coins, the same one he'd offered before, trying to buy her silence. "I'm being generous. Take this. Enough to get you far away. California, Oregon. I don't care. Just go." He tossed the pouch onto the dusty ground near her worn boots. It landed with a soft, insulting thud. Lara looked at the pouch. Then she looked back at his face. A face she once thought she loved. A face that now looked like a stranger's mask, cold and empty. "My child will be born soon, Jedediah," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Here. This is the only home I have." His jaw tightened into a knot of fury. "That brat ain't mine, and this shack ain't a home. It's an eyesore on my land." He gave a sharp nod to his men. "You've got until the first heavy snow. If you're still here when the plains turn white." Well, winter can be harsh. Accidents happen. One of the ranch hands smirked, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near her feet. "Best listen to the boss, ma'am. This ain't healthy country for strays." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a death sentence. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the wind. They weren't just asking her to leave. They were telling her they would kill her if she didn't. She bent down, her movement slow and deliberate, and picked up a few more sticks. She ignored the pouch of money as if it were a coiled snake. "I have nothing left to lose, Jedediah," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the wind. "Threats don't frighten me anymore." Stone stared at her, his face a mixture of shock and rage. He expected tears. He expected pleading. He did not expect this quiet, unbreakable resolve. He couldn't break her, and that made him hate her even more. With a curse snarled under his breath, he wheeled his horse around. "Don't say you weren't warned," he threw back over his shoulder. He and his men rode away, leaving Lara alone with the wind, the dust, and the chilling promise of the coming snow. She watched them go, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She knew then that this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about war, and the first snowflakes were already beginning to dance in the air. The world turned gray. The days grew short and cold, the sky a permanent, bruised purple. Lara moved like a shadow, husbanding her strength, her mind a constant flurry of calculations. She gathered dried roots. She set snares, catching the occasional rabbit with a surprising skill she'd forgotten she had. It was knowledge from another life, a life before towns, before judgment, skills learned from a father she barely remembered, a man who had taught her how to read the land, how to listen to the wind. These dormant instincts, buried for years, now awakened, sharpened by desperation. She watched everything. She saw Stone's men riding the perimeter of the property, their eyes lingering on her lean-to like vultures circling a kill. She saw the people in town, the ones who avoided her gaze, the ones who offered a flicker of pity before quickly snuffing it out. She saw the fear in their eyes, not fear of her, but fear of Jedediah Stone. Preacher Thorne's sermons grew more venomous. He used her as a parable, a cautionary tale of sin and divine retribution. He warned his flock not to help her, lest they invite God's wrath upon themselves. He painted her not as a woman, but as a contamination. The town pulled its skirts tighter. The mercantile owner barred his door when he saw her coming. Children, emboldened by their parents' whispers, threw pebbles at her shelter, their taunts carried on the wind like tiny, sharp pieces of glass. Each insult, each act of cruelty was a small cut. But instead of bleeding her hope away, it forged something harder inside her. A core of steel, a resolve to endure. Not for herself, but for the tiny life kicking insistently within her. And then the storm hit. It didn't arrive. It attacked. A sudden, violent explosion of white. The world vanished. The wind wasn't just screaming anymore. It was roaring, a physical force that shook the flimsy walls of her shelter. Drifts piled up against the rocks, threatening to bury her alive. Inside, huddled beneath a single threadbare blanket, she felt it. The first undeniable contraction. A deep, primal tightening in her womb. Labor. It was starting. Now. Here. In the heart of the storm. Too early. Cold, sharp fear. A fear unlike any she had felt before, pierced through her resolve. She was going to have this baby alone, in a frozen tomb. And that's when she heard the sound. A violent, ripping noise that tore through the howl of the wind. The splintering of wood. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Peering through a crack in the wall, she saw them. Two figures, just indistinct shapes in the blizzard, systematically tearing her shelter apart. Jedediah's men. They worked with a brutal, silent efficiency, kicking down the walls she'd so carefully patched, pulling away the branches she'd so painstakingly gathered. Snow poured in, instantly extinguishing the tiny, precious fire she'd struggled to keep alive. They didn't speak. They just destroyed. Cold, methodical destruction, following their orders. And then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished back into the white chaos. She was completely exposed. The wind cut through her thin clothes like 1,000 tiny razors. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, stealing her breath, doubling her over in agony. Panic, raw and suffocating, clawed at her throat. To stay here meant to freeze. To stay here meant her baby would be born into a grave of snow. To stay here meant to die. A desperate, insane idea sparked in her mind. Redemption Creek. Maybe if they saw her like this, actively in labor, dying in the very worst storm they'd condemned her to, maybe someone, anyone, would find a shred of mercy in their heart. It was a fool's hope, but it was the only one she had left. Clinging to that fragile, stupid hope, she pushed herself up. She staggered out into the teeth of the blizzard, a lone, freezing figure fighting her way back towards the town that had cast her out. Each step was a universe of pain. The lights of the town were faint, mocking stars, impossibly far away. She fell. She crawled. She got back up, driven by pure primal instinct, the instinct of a mother protecting her child. She finally reached the edge of town, collapsing against the wall of the livery stable, gasping for air, snow plastering her face, her clothes, her entire world. And then figures emerged from the swirling white. Jedediah Stone, his face a mask of cold indifference under the brim of his hat. And beside him, Preacher Thorne, his expression one of grim, righteous satisfaction. A surge of desperate, illogical hope shot through her. They saw her. They were here. They had to help her. Please, she choked out, the word torn from her lips by the wind. Help me. The baby. It's coming now. Stone just stared. His eyes were like chips of blue ice. There was nothing in them. No pity, no remorse, nothing. Thorne stepped forward. His voice cut through the gale, laced with a chilling certainty that was more terrifying than the storm itself. The path of the wicked leads to desolation, he declared, his gaze sweeping over her shivering, pathetic form. This storm is the Lord's judgment made manifest. Turn back, sinner. There is no sanctuary for you here. One of Stone's men, lurking nearby, stepped forward and with a grunt of effort, kicked a spray of snow directly into her face. Get out of here, he snarled. You ain't welcome. Go die in the drifts where you belong. And just like that, the last tiny ember of hope she had was extinguished. There was no mercy here. Only cold, hard, righteous condemnation. They were watching her die. They were letting her die. Fear, so sharp and primal it felt like a physical blow, gave her one final burst of adrenaline. She scrambled to her feet, turning her back on the harsh lights and false promises of Redemption Creek. She turned her back on humanity, and she stumbled blindly out onto the open plains, straight into the heart of the raging storm. The world dissolved into a howling chaos of white. She no longer walked. She was just a piece of debris, tossed and battered by the storm. Pain was a constant roar, blurring with the shriek of the wind. Contractions ripped through her, pulling her down again and again. Finally, her body gave out. Utterly spent, she collapsed into a deep snowdrift. The cold seeped in, and with it, a strange, quiet peace. The pain began to numb. The roaring of the wind started to sound like a lullaby. This is it, she thought, curling her body protectively around her belly. The end. Forgive me, little one, she whispered to the life inside her. She closed her eyes against the swirling white, surrendering to the cold, unaware that she was being watched, unaware that shapes were moving through the storm, drawn by a power far greater than the hatred of men. Miles away, battling the same impossible blizzard, Chief Maddow led his Lakota hunting party home. They moved with the quiet confidence of men born to this land, their ponies sure-footed in the blinding snow. They carried precious buffalo meat, a gift that would feed their families through the harsh winter. It was a young warrior named Chayton, the falcon, whose sharp eyes first saw it, a dark shape against the endless white. A fallen log? An animal? As they drew closer, the shape resolved into something shocking. A person, a white woman, half buried in the snow, unmoving. The warriors stopped, their horses steaming in the frigid air. They murmured uneasily in their own language. Finding a Wasichu out here, especially like this, was a bad omen. It signaled trouble. Old wounds, broken treaties, the constant, creeping encroachment of the settlers. Suspicion was a shield they had learned to carry. "Leave her, Maddow," urged an older warrior named Tanka. His face was a map of hard winters and broken promises. "Her own people likely put her here. It is not our fight. The storm will finish it." Maddow silenced him with a raised hand. He dismounted, his moccasins sinking deep into the powder as he approached the drift. He knelt beside her, his movements gentle, and brushed the snow from her face. Her skin felt like ice. Her lips were tinged blue. Her breathing was a mere flutter, a tiny, fragile flag of life in a sea of death. But she was alive. Then his eyes fell on the unmistakable swell beneath her frozen shawl. Tewian, buffalo woman, the Lakota term for a pregnant woman, cast out, abandoned, heavy with child in a killer storm. A flicker of profound empathy crossed Maddow's stoic, weathered face. In that moment, he didn't see a white woman. He didn't see an enemy or a settler or a symbol of the conflict between their peoples. He saw a mother, fighting for her unborn child. He saw the ultimate vulnerability, betrayed by the very people who should have protected her. Lakota tradition held a deep, unshakable reverence for life, especially the miracle of birth. To leave her here, to let the storm finish the cruel work of her own kind, would be to violate the very core of his beliefs. It would be an insult to Wakantanka, the Great Spirit. It would be a stain on the honor of his people. He looked up at his waiting warriors, his gaze clear, his decision absolute. "Wakantanka Wachi, the Great Spirit is watching," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Life is sacred. We do not leave her to the wind." He ignored their doubtful glances. He gently scooped Lara into his arms. She felt terrifyingly light, like a bird with broken wings. He carefully unwrapped his own thick buffalo robe and wrapped it around her shivering form, creating a cocoon of warmth against the deadly cold. As he held her, he saw her eyelids flutter, a faint, weak sign, but it was enough. "She carries life," Maddow stated, his voice now ringing with authority. "Her spirit is strong. We take her to our camp. Chapoy will know what to do." He carefully lifted her onto his own pony, mounting behind her, holding her securely against his chest, sharing his own body heat. The warriors exchanged glances, but no one argued. Maddow's wisdom was unquestioned. He was their chief, and his compassion was not a weakness. It was the ultimate expression of Lakota strength. As the small party turned their horses towards the hidden valley that sheltered their winter camp, Maddow felt the weight of his choice. He was bringing the conflict of the outside world into their sanctuary, but he was also upholding the deepest values of his people. He looked down at the pale, unconscious face nestled against his chest. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He only knew that the storm had delivered her into his care. And in that moment, beneath the howling fury of the blizzard, he claimed her survival as his responsibility. A fragile connection was forged, a promise of sanctuary offered against the biting winds of hatred. The Lakota winter camp was a world away from Redemption Creek. Nestled in a protected bend of a frozen river, it was a haven of smoky warmth and quiet community. Teepees stood like silent, snow-dusted sentinels, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. The arrival of Matto's party, with the chief himself carrying an unconscious white woman, brought the camp to a stunned, watchful halt. Faces peered from teepee flaps, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and deep-seated suspicion. Matto didn't hesitate. He carried Laura directly to the largest teepee, the dwelling of Chapoy, the tribe's revered medicine woman and spiritual guide. She was ancient, her face a beautiful network of wise wrinkles, her eyes sharp and knowing. Chapoy examined Laura with swift, practiced hands. She clicked her tongue at the sight of Laura's frostbitten fingers and toes, murmuring Lakota healing chants as she immediately began applying poultices of herbs and bear grease. Other women from the tribe arrived silently, bringing warm broth, thick furs, and offering their help without a word needing to be spoken. Laura drifted in and out of consciousness, a hazy fog of pain, cold, and utter exhaustion. But through the fog, she sensed things she hadn't felt in a very long time. The softness of the furs, the savory warmth of the broth, the gentle, unfamiliar language spoken with a kindness that felt like a balm on her wounded soul. She felt cared for. Under Chapoy's expert ministration, Laura's body slowly, painfully thawed. The immediate threat of freezing to death receded, but the ordeal of the storm had triggered full, intense labor. The Lakota women rallied around her. Their movements were calm, assured, their presence a quiet, powerful source of strength. The terror of being alone in the storm was gone, replaced by the supportive energy of experienced hands and encouraging murmurs. They held her. They wiped her brow with cool cloths. They gave her sips of willow bark tea to ease the pain. They guided her through the waves of contractions with a gentle competence that felt profoundly, unbelievably safe. Several days after her rescue, shielded from the lingering storm within the warm, smoky embrace of the teepee, Lara gave birth. A small, sharp cry pierced the quiet anticipation. A son, healthy, strong-voiced, perfect. Holding him for the first time, wrapped in soft, clean furs, Lara wept. But these were not the tears of pain and despair she had shed in the blizzard. These were tears of overwhelming relief. Tears of gratitude so profound it felt like her heart would burst. This tiny, precious life, condemned by the world she had fled, was welcomed here not as a burden or a sin, but as a miracle. Matto came to see the child later that day. He stood at the entrance of the teepee, observing the mother and her son, and a rare softness touched his usually stoic features. He stepped forward and presented Lara with a small, beautifully adorned buckskin pouch. The quill work was intricate, a work of art. "A gift," he said, his English careful but clear. "For the little warrior, may he grow strong like the bear." He then turned and spoke to Chapoy and Lakota. The old medicine woman nodded, then looked at Lara, her eyes kind. "Matto says you survived the Waziatate, the great north wind," she explained. "You have shown a strength that is honored. From now on you will be called Winyan Tawakoni." Lara looked at her, confused. Chapoy smiled gently. "Winyan Tawakoni. It means woman who lives." And then she gestured to the baby. "Matto suggests a name for the boy. Chaitin, after the one with eyes like a falcon who saw you first in the snow." Tears welled in Lara's eyes again. Winyan Tawakoni, woman who lives. It felt right. It felt true. And Chaitin, a strong name. A name forever tied to their rescue, to their new beginning. Life in the Lakota camp was a slow, gentle healing, not just from the physical ordeal, but from the deeper wounds of betrayal and cruelty. The constant, quiet support of the Lakota women was a medicine more powerful than any of Chapoy's herbs. They taught her their words, they shared their tasks, They showed her how to scrape hides, mend teepees, find edible berries buried deep beneath the snow. She learned the rhythm of their lives, a rhythm tied to the earth and the seasons. She learned about the deep respect they held for the land, for each other, and for the spirit world that guided them. Her quiet nature, once a defense mechanism in a hostile world, now became a strength. It allowed her to listen, to observe, to learn, and slowly to earn their trust. Little Chayton thrived. He was passed from one pair of loving arms to the next, bundled warmly against the cold, sung ancient Lakota lullabies. Lara, Winyan Tawakoni, watched him, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. She watched Maddo as he led his people, his fairness, his wisdom, his quiet strength a constant reassurance. He kept a respectful distance, but she often felt his protective gaze on her and her son. She knew without him ever saying it that he was the reason she had been so completely accepted. She was no longer Lara, the outcast. She was Winyan Tawakoni, part of the Teospaye, the extended family of the tribe. But the plains have long ears and stories travel on the wind. Eventually, a French trapper, trading for furs near the Lakota winter grounds, heard the tale. A white woman, saved from a blizzard, living among the Sioux with her newborn son. The description was unmistakable. Weeks later, when that same trapper passed through Redemption Creek to resupply, he shared the story over a glass of whiskey at the saloon. The tale inevitably, like a poison arrow finding its target, reached the ears of Jedediah Stone. Ice formed in Stone's gut. She was alive, alive, and she had the child, his child, living among the savages. A cold, sick dread warred with a hot, violent fury inside him. The fury of being defied, of his perfect, cruel plan failing. The dread of exposure. The dread of this living, breathing proof of his lie one day returning to haunt him. The dread of the scandal he had tried so hard to bury in a snowdrift. The news spread to Preacher Thorne, who saw it not as a miracle of survival, but as a personal affront, an abomination. A fallen woman consorting with heathens, he thundered privately to Stone, his face purple with rage. She bears your issue, Jedodiah. It reflects on us all, on the sanctity of this Christian community. You must retrieve them, bring them back to face proper judgment. Thorne's righteous fury was the perfect cover for Stone's panicked fear. Goaded by the preacher and by his own festering pride, Jedediah made a decision born of pure arrogance and terror. He would not let this stand. He would go there, and he would take them back. He gathered a dozen of his most loyal and most ruthless ranch hands, men who followed his orders without question. He armed them well, with rifles and pistols. Thorne insisted on accompanying them, clutching his heavy Bible to his chest like a shield, his face set in grim, determined lines. They rode out from Redemption Creek a few days later, a posse fueled by hypocrisy, self-interest, and warped righteousness. They were heading straight for the Lakota winter camp. Jedediah carried a heavy pouch of gold. He still clung to the absurd, arrogant belief that everything and everyone had a price, that even a mother and child, sheltered by a sacred code of honor, could be bought. He fundamentally misunderstood the people he was about to confront, and he had no idea of the transformation that had taken place in the woman they now called their own. Their arrival was not a surprise. Lakota scouts had watched them coming for miles. As Stone's posse rode into the wide clearing before the main camp, they were not met with fear or chaos. They were met with a deep, watchful silence. Lakota warriors seemed to melt out from between the trees, from the entrances of the teepees. They didn't move aggressively, but with a calm, deliberate purpose. Bows were held casually. Hands rested near the hilts of knives. There were far, far more of them than Stone had anticipated. The women and children had already faded back toward the lodges, disappearing from sight. The air grew thick with the tension you could taste. Chief Maddo emerged from the center of the camp. He was flanked by the old warrior, Tonka, and by Chayton, the young warrior who had first spotted Lara in the snow. Maddo stood tall, his arms crossed over his chest. He was unarmed. His posture radiated a calm, unshakable authority, that made Jedediah Stone, with all his guns and money, look small and blustering. Stone swung down from his horse, trying to project a command he did not feel. Thorne scrambled down behind him, clutching his Bible like a weapon. The ranch hands dismounted uncertainly, their eyes darting nervously toward the silent, observing warriors who now formed a loose, menacing semicircle around them. "Chief Maddow," Stone began, his voice a little too loud in the heavy silence, "we're here for the white woman, and the boy she had." Maddow's gaze was level, unwavering. It seemed to look right through Stone, into the rotten core of his soul. "Her name is Winyan Tawakoni," Maddow said, his voice quiet, yet it carried across the clearing with perfect clarity. "She and her son, Chayton, are Lakota now. They are under our protection." Thorne, his face flushed with indignation, puffed out his chest and stepped forward. "This is unnatural. She is a Christian woman who has fallen into sin. She belongs with her own kind, under God's authority. Not here, among—" He waved a dismissive hand at the camp, at the people, as if they were nothing. Maddow's eyes narrowed, just slightly. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Her own kind left her to die in a blizzard. While she was in labor," Maddow stated, each word a hammer blow of truth. "Is that your God's authority? Is that Christian kindness?" A murmur rippled through the watching Lakota. Back at the edge of the woods, a few townsfolk who had cautiously followed Stone's party, curious to see the outcome, shifted uncomfortably. A flicker of shame crossed their faces. Stone's face turned a blotchy red. That's not the whole story," he stammered. "There were misunderstandings." He fumbled in his coat and pulled out his heavy pouch of gold, holding it out as if it were a magic talisman that could erase his sins. "Look, Chief, let's be reasonable. The woman caused trouble, but she's white. The boy, well, take this gold. A generous payment for your troubles. Just give them back to us. We'll handle our own." Maddow looked at the pouch of gold with an expression of such profound, utter contempt it made Stone flinch. Then he looked back into Stone's eyes. "You think honor can be bought?" Maddow asked, his voice dangerously soft. "You think a child's life has a price?" He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his words press down on every man there. "You are the father, Ska," he said, using the Lakota word for white man. "Deny it, again, in front of all these men." Jedediah was trapped. He stammered, his eyes darting around for an escape. No, it's complicated." "It is simple," Maddow countered, his voice rising with a cold, hard anger. "You cast out your own blood. You left the mother of your child to die. Now you come with guns and money and lies to steal them back." He gestured towards the camp behind him. "Here, Winyan Tawakoni found Tiospai family. Here, her son is welcomed as a gift, not a burden. She has found honor here, something you seem to know very little about." And at that exact moment, the flap of Chapoy's teepee was pushed aside, and Laura stepped out into the clearing. The transformation was stunning. She wasn't the terrified, freezing creature Stone remembered. She wore practical, well-kept buckskin, her hair neatly braided in the Lakota style. She looked healthy. She looked strong. And the eyes that met his held none of the fear he remembered. They held only a calm, clear, unshakable strength. Little Chayton was held securely in a cradleboard on her back, his dark eyes peeking out curiously at the tense scene. Several Lakota women stood quietly behind her, a silent phalanx of unwavering support. She walked forward slowly, her steps sure and steady on the frozen ground. She stopped near Maddow and she looked directly at Jedediah Stone. Her voice when she spoke was not the pleading whisper he recalled. It was steady and clear, and it carried with an authority that stunned every man there into silence. "Jedediah, Preacher Thorne," she said, her gaze sweeping over them both, dismissing them. "My name is Winyan Tawakoni." She gestured to the people around her, to the land, to the sky. "This is my home now. My son, Chayton, is Lakota. We belong here." She took a final step forward, her eyes locking with Stone's. "We are not yours to take." Stone just gaped at her, momentarily speechless. He was stunned by her transformation, by her absolute fearless refusal. Thorne started sputtering about blasphemy and legal rights and Christian duty, but his words sounded weak and pathetic, lost against the backdrop of the silent, grim-faced warriors and Lara's newfound dignity. Stone's men shifted nervously. They were acutely aware of the dozens of warriors watching their every move. They were aware of how outnumbered they were. They were aware of how badly this could end for them. They had come here expecting to intimidate a helpless woman and a few savages. Instead, they had walked into the heart of a nation, and they were the ones who were afraid. They weren't feared here. They were pathetic intruders. Matto stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Lara, a clear and final act of protection. His gaze swept over Stone and his nervous, sweating men. "You have heard her," he said, his voice holding the weight of absolute finality. "You have your answer. Leave this valley, now, and do not ever return." There was no room for negotiation. There was no argument to be made. It was over. Humiliation burned in Jedediah Stone's gut, hotter and more painful than his fear. He looked at Matto's unyielding face. He looked at Lara's resolute stance. He looked at the silent threat of the warriors surrounding him. And in the distance, he could see the faces of the townsfolk witnessing his utter and complete failure. Without another word, he turned, yanked himself onto his horse, and spurred it savagely, fleeing back the way he came. Thorne, red-faced and sputtering incoherently, scrambled onto his own horse and followed. The rest of the ranch hands mounted in a clumsy, panicked haste, almost tripping over each other in their desperation to escape the heavy silence and the piercing, contemptuous stares. They retreated from the Lakota Valley, not as conquerors, but as chaste fools. Their power revealed as hollow, their cruelty exposed, their righteousness a pathetic lie. As their figures dwindled in the distance, a collective sigh seemed to rise from the Lakota camp. No blood had been shed, no arrow had been fired, and yet a profound victory had been won. Lara watched them go, feeling the last ties to her painful past dissolving like smoke on the wind. She met Matto's eyes across the clearing. A deep, silent understanding passed between them. Respect earned, sanctuary given. A bond stronger than blood, forged in the heart of a storm. The story of Jedediah Stone's failed expedition, of his public humiliation at the hands of a Lakota chief and the woman he'd tried to kill, spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. His power, once absolute, was shattered. Men still worked for him, but the fear they felt was now tinged with contempt. Preacher Thorne's sermons on morality were met with skeptical silence. The rigid, self-righteous certainty of the town had been broken. People started to wonder if their judgment was truly as righteous as they believed. The cracks in the town's facade had been exposed for all to see. Far away in the sheltered valley, Winyan Tawakoni embraced her new life. She learned the rhythms of the seasons, the stories of the stars, the wisdom of the elders. She became a skilled healer under Chapoy's tutelage, her hands gentle and knowing. Chayton grew tall and strong, his laughter echoing through the camp. He knew Matto as a leader to be respected, Chapoy as a grandmother to be cherished, and the warriors as his uncles. He knew the story of his birth, of his mother's survival. It wasn't a tale of shame. It was a tale of strength, of honor, and of the incredible, unexpected gift of finding a home. Lara never forgot the cruelty of Redemption Creek. The memories were scars, but they no longer held power over her. They were simply part of the journey that had led her here, to this life, to this family, to this peace. Her peace was hard-won. Her home was found not in a place marked on a map, but in the heart of a people who valued courage over conformity and compassion over condemnation. Under the vast open sky of the northern plains, surrounded by the fierce protective honor of the Lakota, the outcast they called Woman Who Lives had finally found her true redemption. If you enjoyed the story of survival and justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss the incredible tales we have coming next.